A politician pointed, but the soldier didn't move. Not a glance, not a blink, not even a breath. The courtyard froze, as silence stood its ground against a voice that expected obedience. At the soldier's feet, a small badge caught the light. Old, worn, unclaimed. And in that moment, the one who said nothing spoke the loudest. The politician lowered his hand, but the silence remained. Tourists held their phones, but few remembered to record. A child asked his mother, "Is he allowed to speak to the soldier like that?" The mother said nothing. Somewhere in the line, a man in a faded blazer lowered his head. The soldier stood, still, perfectly still, his boots untouched by the shuffle, his rifle steady, his chin slightly lifted. He did not blink. He did not flinch. He did not react. Not to the tone, not to the presence, not even to the expectation. What held him there wasn't fear. It wasn't pride. It was something else, something older, something deeper. And then the wind shifted, just enough to catch the badge at his feet. It didn't fall from him. It didn't belong to anyone in the crowd. But the way he looked at it, you'd think it once held a name he never spoke again. He didn't move, but something shifted. Not in his posture, in his eyes. Just once. He looked down, at the badge, then back to stillness. His lips didn't part, but they tightened. Not in defiance, not in fear. It looked like memory, held beneath the skin, close, unreachable. The soldier stayed silent, but his silence wasn't empty. It was carrying something, something he didn't want to put down. A weight, a wound, or both. No one else noticed, but the old man behind him did. He lowered his cap, as if to honor what no one else could see. The badge, the look, the silence. It felt like grief. But grief? For who? No name was spoken. No story was told. Which meant the one story everyone expected to hear was exactly the one he'd never let them have. The silence lingered. Too long for comfort. Too long to be casual. A small voice broke it. Not loud, not sharp. Just a question. From a boy, no older than 10. "Mom, is that soldier sad?" The mother hesitated, her eyes still locked on the man in red. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just reached down and held his hand. Not to stop him, not to hush him, but to join him. Others noticed, not many, but enough. One by one, phones lowered, shoulders straightened, breaths deepened. No one knew his name. No one knew the story. But somehow, they all knew this wasn't performance. This wasn't theater. And the longer he stood there, unmoving, unbreaking, the more it felt like they were the ones who needed to. He didn't move. Still, unshaken. But the world around him began to shift. The politician stepped closer, crossed a line meant to be respected, a line no visitor was ever meant to cross. No one stopped him. Not the guards, not the aides, not the tourists. A few phones lifted again, not to witness, but to wait. Then, a voice, sharp, dismissive. "You salute your leaders, don't you?" No answer, no reaction. "Go on then, that's an order." The words fell flat, loud but empty. The boy looked up again. "Mom, is he allowed to say that?" She didn't reply, but this time she let go of his hand. Not out of fear, but because she had just realized the question wasn't meant for the soldier. It was meant for everyone who stayed quiet. He didn't flinch, but the space between them tightened. Not by words, not by movement, but by presence. The politician stepped forward again, louder this time, sharper, almost certain he would break through. "You've saluted presidents, generals, even kings. What makes me different?" The soldier said nothing, but his hand, it tightened slightly on the rifle, not in defense, not in fear, but in memory. One breath, held too long, then exhaled like regret. A phone beeped. No one laughed. A pigeon flew across the square. No one looked up. The boy whispered, "Mum, why does he look sad?" The mother said, "He doesn't." Then paused and added, "But maybe he's carrying someone who still does." And in that pause, the weight returned, not to the guard, but to everyone watching him not move. He never looked up, but something cracked, not in his stance, in the way the silence stopped being still. The veteran behind him, older, slower, stepped forward, just once, and said softly, "He lost someone." No name, no date, just enough to shift the air. He was holding the line when the boy next to him didn't make it back. The crowd turned, not towards the veteran, but towards the silence they now understood was carrying a name that wasn't his. The badge on the ground. It wasn't dropped. It was placed, deliberately. And that posture they thought was pride was actually grief holding itself together. Not a refusal, but a remembrance. Not defiance, but duty. And suddenly, the question changed. It was no longer, "Why won't he salute?" But, "How does he still stand?" It wasn't dropped. It wasn't lost. It had been carried, for years, folded into a glove, pressed behind medals, tucked into silence. The same badge from a combat medic's uniform, frayed at the edges, dulled by time, softened by regret. He had carried it through summer heat, winter frost, ceremonial drills, crowded applause, and still, no one had ever seen it. Until today, he placed it there, not as a statement, but as a memory, one only he could read. No inscription, no initials, just fabric, and blood long washed away. The rifle in his hand was steady, but the fingers around it were not trembling, not weak, just remembering. The boy beside him, that final day, had been 19, still smiling, still believing. He had whispered, "I know you can't, but I wish you would." And the silence that followed never left. Not the noise, not the orders, not the medals, just that voice and the badge that stayed. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. And yet, something had shifted. Not in him, in us. We had waited for defiance, expected resistance, prepared for drama, but what we got was stillness. A silence we couldn't outstare. A calm we couldn't undo. He wasn't angry. He wasn't proud. He was holding something we couldn't carry. And that made us uncomfortable. The politician tried again. Salute your ally. Show respect. Obey the moment. But the words, once heavy with expectation, now felt uninvited, misplaced, because the man they were aimed at was already somewhere else. Not above us, not beneath us, but ahead of us, holding a memory we hadn't earned, honoring a promise we didn't understand. A child in the crowd raised his hand in a hesitant salute, then another, and another, not to a uniform, not to a title, but to a man who chose not to move. When all of us already had, he didn't respond. Not to the words, not to the orders, not to the crowd now falling into silence. He stood, exactly as he had, exactly as he always did. But then, his hand moved, not far, not fast, just enough to lift the badge from the stone. No flourish, no pause for effect. He picked it up like it belonged to someone who still mattered, brushed it clean with his thumb, folded it once, pressed it to his chest. Then, he returned it to his pocket. Not hidden, not forgotten, Just home. The politician said nothing. His arms dropped. His voice, so loud before, now absent. And the soldier, he didn't move again, because he didn't need to. One gesture had said it all. It wasn't about obedience, or rank, or ceremony. It was about memory, about the kind of loyalty that doesn't raise its voice, because it never left. He didn't return the salute. He didn't bow. He didn't explain. He just stood, long after the question stopped, long after the voices faded. And somehow, that stillness spoke more than any answer ever could. Because in that moment, we all saw something we didn't want to name. The cost of loyalty, the burden of memory, the power of not breaking when others expect you to bend. He wasn't there to impress or to challenge. He was there because someone else never made it home. And as the courtyard returned to motion and the crowd to noise, the silence he left behind didn't leave us. So now we ask ourselves, when obedience is expected, but your vow is to something higher, do you stay silent, or do you still stand? Some men are remembered for what they said, others for what they did, but a rare few are remembered for what they refused to do. He stood still, not because he was weak, but because he had once moved and paid the price. In a world where noise is mistaken for truth and reaction for strength, he taught us that there is something sacred about restraint, about standing your ground, not in defiance, but in remembrance. Loyalty, after all, is not proved by obedience. It's proved by what you carry when no one is watching. We age, we change, we lose. But if we're lucky, we hold on to one thing that doesn't bow to noise, to ego, to time, dignity. And perhaps that's the lesson, that sometimes the strongest act you'll ever take is to simply stay still.